What's the biggest plot twist you've seen in real life? Story 1. Met a dude at my local 24-hour fitness who was wearing a Shark Punch t-shirt. Since most people have no freaking clue about the band, I immediately decided I needed to talk to bro out with this dude about his particular taste in music, which was metal. We get to talking and find out he's a drummer, lives locally, and wants to start jamming to rock some music. Awesome. Exchange numbers and all that good stuff. Of course, however, actually meeting up with a reliable musician is much harder than it sounds, despite the enthusiasm. Around the same time, I was working security at a local bar and met this random cute girl who wasn't from the area, but was totally into me and wanted to hang out, exchange numbers and plan to meet up. When we finally did, we hit it off pretty well, but she had mentioned that she was still kind of dating around, but really liked me and hoped I was okay with that. Totally was okay with that because I was also doing the same thing. We hung out maybe another time, but then shortly after was hit with the "sorry, but I'm kind of dating this other guy for serious" line, and I said I understood and moved on. When the gym guy and I finally managed to get together and jam, a friend of his was there to play bass with us. We got introduced and started talking about random stuff, when the gym guy happened to mention to the buddy about the girl he was dating. He and I both started sharing our similarities and preference of people we date. And I asked to see what she looked like. He's like, "Sorry dude, she doesn't have any social media or anything like that. But I have a video of her at some restaurant we went to a few weeks back." He shows me the video. Me: "Oh, she's cute." Him: "Yeah, I met her smoking outside of some bar in LA." Me: "Dude, she totally reminds me of this girl I was dating not too long ago. What's her name?" Him: "Kim." Me: "Wait, really? That's so weird. I was dating a girl named Kim too. What are the odds? Hold up, she has a Snapchat, right?" Him: "Yeah. Why?" Me: "I start trying to find her on Snap. Dude, what's her name on there?" The friend at this time is looking at the both of us like, "Oh frick," and starts laughing. Both of us at the same time. Kimber Sleaze. The friend is dying of laughter at this point, and we both come to the realization that we are the same dude she ended up leaving and or staying with. We still ended up jamming anyway. Story 2. I'm a medic, and one morning we had a call for an older woman. 70s if I remember right. She was having cardiac issues and was in compensated shock from a very low heart rate. From the time we got to her home to the time we were in the ambulance, she had gotten much worse. We paced her heart, and she was doing good the rest of the hour ride to the hospital. About 16 hours later, we got called for a rollover car accident. Get there, and we have one male in the service, unresponsive. The vehicle is upside down and off the road. We get him out. He's in very bad shape. Wasn't breathing, so we intubated him. And off to the hospital we went. Almost to the hospital, which is 30 miles away. And he goes into traumatic cardiac arrest, dead when we get there. While we were on the way to the hospital, we found his wallet, since we didn't know who he was. We saw his badge, a retired police officer, and I remember from the morning, our patient's husband was a retired officer. He was on the way to see his wife. Unfortunately, he stopped by the bar first. While it wasn't my job, I went to the nurse to talk to the wife and let her know what happened. She thanked me for being there for her family so much that day. Story 3. I have a coworker, Joe. A great guy who has an equally great wife, Nina. Over the years, and even prior to meeting Joe, multiple doctors told Nina she would be unable to get pregnant on her own due to problems with her ovaries and fallopian tubes. She and Joe decided that a child-free life was okay with them, so she and Joe married and lived happily for 12 years. When they started out, they didn't have much, but as time passed, they progressed in their careers and made a nice life for themselves. Finally, they got to the point where they were comfortable enough to buy a sports car for themselves, something Joe always wanted to do. It was the first new off-the-lot car they ever owned. Now Joe and Nina were in their early 40s at this time and figured they'd just coast on into retirement. Well, about 6 months after they bought their car, winter came. Nina got a case of the flu she just couldn't seem to shake. She just felt run down and nauseous, just not herself. After about 3 weeks of this, she went to the doctor. The doctor asked if there was any possibility she could be pregnant. She laughed at him and said, "I've been married for 12 years now and haven't had so much as a scare." Multiple doctors said, "It's just not going to happen for me. No way." But her doctor said, "Humor me and let me rule it out. Just do a urine test." Well, wanting to figure out what was going wrong with her ASAP, Nina peed on the stick, and you guessed it, pregnant. So, in their 40s and with 12 years of living just the two of them, they were expecting. After the initial shock wore off, they were actually pretty excited even though they had to sell the sports car since a two-seater wasn't really going to work for them. A few months later, their son John came into the world the usual way, a happy, healthy baby. So they became a family of 3, and they still are today. John just finished his first year of high school. Great kid and super smart too. You just never know what life's going to throw at you. Story 4. 1991. I'm 19, just signed the lease for my first solo apartment, just got the first paycheck for my new job, and I deposited the paycheck at an ATM. Another first. I'd always gone to the bank to do it. 2 weeks later, I get my bank statement in the mail and see with horror I only have $1.87 in my account. Way wrong. I should have at least $200. I've been very careful with my spending. I came within $2 of bouncing my first rent check. I'm literally reaching for the phone to call the bank when the phone rings. It's the police asking if my ATM card was stolen. I check my wallet and the card is missing. My job at a theater pub came with cash tips, so I didn't use the card often. And tell them I was going to call them anyway because I was missing $200 from my account. Well, we've got your card and your $200, so come down to the police station, they tell me. I can't figure out how they have my card and the cash. Doesn't make sense. I drove down there. The detective says someone, let's call him Bob, pulled in to use an ATM and saw a man acting suspiciously while he was doing it, moving back and forth as if trying to dodge the camera. Bob says the man left the ATM, got into the car, and drove away at high speeds as if fleeing. Bob then went to the ATM and put his card in, which popped out. Bob then withdrew $200, and then another ATM card popped out. My card. Bob's card had popped out because the crook had left my card in the ATM before speeding away. Bob realized he had withdrawn the money from my account and not his. So he brought my card and the cash to the police and reported the attempted theft. The detective gives me the description of the crook. According to Bob, it was a man of 5'7", with brown hair and round gold-rimmed glasses. I say out loud, so about my height, my hair color, and glasses like mine, before realizing Bob was describing me. I'd never deposited a check in the ATM before, so I was moving back and forth following the instructions on the screen, filling out the envelope with my account number, punching the amount in, etc. And then forgot to take my card out and just left because I'm a freaking idiot. I drove away at high speeds because I was 19 and that's how I drove everywhere. Worried the detective might be annoyed, I didn't tell him I was the crook. I just thanked him and left with the money I stole for myself. Somewhere in a box in my closet, I still have the police report, where I'm both the victim and the perp. Story 5. A guy I knew in high school English class was talking one winter day about how he was late to school because someone hid his mailbox. His folks made him fix it up before he went to school. He missed his ride and had to walk instead, but the school staff was cool about it and didn't punish him. A few minutes later, another girl comes into class and she's talking about how her morning sucked. She lost control going down a hill and hit someone's mailbox. She freaked out and drove off before anyone witnessed it and described a few details of the house. The mailbox guy puts 2 and 2 together and blurts out, "You hit my mailbox." He wasn't super mad about it and she turned beet red. It was hilarious at the time the way they both reacted. Story 6. Was on a flight from Paris to Boston. Had the aisle seat across from a little hall of bathrooms in the middle of the plane. At one point, a man a few rows up goes into a bathroom and after a couple of minutes comes out and is just standing in the aisle, so it gets my attention. He keeps going in and coming back out, looking up toward where he is sitting. I see a woman who is sitting next to his empty seat shake her head at him, but he doesn't give up. Finally, after like 5 times of coming in and out, he finally gets the woman to come back there. The lights are out and most of the plane is sleeping. Once she comes back to him, they start making out in the bathroom hallway before he goes into one and pulls her in with him. They're in there for quite a while, and then he comes out and goes back to his seat. A few minutes later, she comes out and does the same. They are really flirty in their seats, and about an hour later repeat it. The man goes in and she joins him. They end up doing this 3 times throughout the flight. My husband, who is sitting next to me, has caught on to what they are doing as well, and we made a joke about how they must be newlyweds on their honeymoon. We get off the plane, and the woman is standing at the gate waiting, and the man is nowhere in sight. As the people from the back of the plane get off, a completely different man goes up to her, gives her a kiss on the lips, and asks her if she could get any sleep on the flight, and calls her dear. Then they walk off towards the luggage area with their arms around each other. So apparently what we thought was an adventurous newlywed couple was actually a woman hooking up with her seatmate while her husband was sitting in the back of the plane. Story 7. I worked for a bank at their call center as a workforce admin. We had a supervisor with a higher than normal personnel rotation. People would be doing okay, then suddenly their numbers would drop and quit. In one of those, the guy quitting made a big freaking scene, called him out, insulted him, pushed him around, and ended up being restrained by other coworkers. At the HR meeting, the supervisor is going off on this guy, bringing up every single thing the guy did wrong. He was boasting a bit too about how he had to fix all the dude's mistakes. The entire time, the guy sat silent, said nothing, and just stared at whoever asked him something. When the HR rep asked if he had anything to add, he pulled out a tape recorder and just played recording after recording. Of what, you ask? Of the supervisor literally threatening the guy, harassing him, belittling him, and overall being a complete douche. Apparently, this guy would target overperforming agents and make their working environment hell in order to protect his position. I'm told the supervisor simply stared at his feet and nodded when told he was fired. The agent, as I understand it, was also let go, but very well compensated. Story 8. For a semester in high school, my English teacher set up this game where one student was a secret killer. Every couple of days, the kid would sneak a note into the classmate's locker, backpack, textbook, or whatever that says you've been killed. My best friend and I were trying harder than anyone else in the class to play detective on this, especially near the end of the semester. Near the end of school, there were about 6 students left alive, and it turns out my best friend was the killer the whole time. They took the last 6 students who were alive and brought them in front of the class one at a time so we could all debate if he or she was the killer or not, and the person could plead their case. The teacher brings my friend up and says, "Okay, tell us what happened." And my friend starts explaining how he had to be very sneaky and so on. So there was a good 20 seconds where I just didn't understand what he was talking about. There wasn't any great reveal or drumroll. He just brought him in front of the class and started explaining how he killed everyone. I lost my mind. The other twist that I forgot to mention is that in week 2 or 3, he went to a student whom he didn't really talk to much and told him that he was the killer and that he needed him to kill me. So he hands him a few of the notes, and from then on, he had a guy on the inside helping him kill people. That's why he could kill so many people without being caught, because if someone got killed, I was with my friend so I could vouch for him. The teacher said there was nothing in the rule book that said you couldn't get another person to help you kill people. It was a huge gamble because the other kid could have just said, "I caught the killer," and the game would have been over. I forgot to mention that if you guess who the killer is, nothing happens. You have to catch them in the act. So when there are only a few people left, everyone is yelling, "You're the killer," and pointing fingers back and forth. Story 9. Little town I grew up in had these 2 car dealerships on opposite sides of town. One Chevy and one Ford. They were bitter rivals. Attack ads, trash-talking salesmen, billboard wars, you name it. When the owner of the Chevy dealership died, it came out that he'd also owned the Ford dealership by way of a shell company. No one saw that coming, including many of the higher-ups who worked at the dealerships. Story 10. My esthetician was giving a Brazilian wax to a new client. The new client goes on and on about this new guy she's dating and how he's a bartender at XYZ. Aesthetician's boyfriend was the bartender. Always fun to find out you're knee-deep waxing the pussy of a woman you are being cheated on with. Story 11. I graduated from law and got engaged to the girl I'd been with through university. We both applied for the same graduate program and ended up working in the same office in Canberra. 3 months before our wedding, I found out she was cheating on me with our mutual boss, and I broke it off with her. Long story short, it got really, really ugly, and the 2 of us ended up in a very bitter court case over the property. Canberra is a pretty small city, and the legal world is pretty bloody small there too. And everywhere I went, I bumped into my ex. It was beginning to seriously get me down, her too as it transpired, and I applied for an Australian government overseas development job in Tuvalu, a Pacific island with about 11,000 population. It's quite a prestigious job to get, with only 2 positions offered for a 2-year contract on a rotating basis. I was successful in the application and moved on island to start my posting, to discover that my ex was the other successful applicant. I spent the next 2 years sharing in a tiny office on a tiny island with the person that I quite honestly loathe more than any other in the world. Story 12. Studying abroad in England. I planned a weekend trip to Barcelona with this girl. These are pre-cell phones. I overslept, got to the airport like 3 hours late. As soon as I arrived, there was the girl. At the exact same time we both say, "I am so sorry." Wait, what are you sorry for? Turns out she overslept too. British Airways changed our tickets for us at no charge, and we got to Barcelona a few hours late. I think the real plot twist is the fact that the airline didn't charge for switching the flights. Story 13. Was at a big art show with my wife and kid, 3 or 4 at the time. We were walking up to a doorway, and I noticed a couple of huge nude statues. I mean, like, no big deal to me, but I was worried about what the kid was going to say because he's a bit of a loudmouth at the best of times. And I didn't need him yelling about private parts in the middle of a crowded art gallery. I realized the worst thing to do was make any kind of scene about it, no covering eyes or anything. Just subtly angling the stroller away from the statues and making a big deal about art things on the opposite side of the aisle. Then the inevitable happens. I remember it happening in slow motion. The kid's head turns toward the naked statues. Eyes widened, arm raises, and finger points. Mouth slowly opens. "Dad, look at those statues. They aren't wearing any socks." Story 14. A friend of mine apparently was sneaking out for a trip outside the city with his friends since his parents didn't let him go. They were on motorbikes, already on their way outside of the city. Suddenly, he got into an accident with another motorbike. It was his dad he crashed into. Story 15. I used to work with a guy in his early 20s who at the time of the story was getting ready to go with his family for his first out-of-town country trip. He was pretty damn excited, and we were getting the play-by-play of all the things. Where they were staying, what they were going to do. He was preparing. Specifically, he would need to get a passport, but his birth certificate had been lost. When the replacement one had arrived, Mom's name isn't the woman he called Mom his whole life. It was his sister. Turns out his sister had him super young, and his grandparents basically took him on and raised them as their son, and no one ever told him the truth. So sister was actually Mom, and Mom and Dad were actually Grandpa and Grandma. The real dad is unknown. He took a few days off work to sort himself out, still went on the trip, still apparently had a blast. Story 16. I was a Starbucks barista before the whole names on cups thing was big, or at least it wasn't really appreciated in my tiny store. There was this very cute guy who came in maybe 4 to 6 times a week, a little often but nothing out of the ordinary. I flirted like mad. He flirted back. It was all great. Then he comes in with his fiancée. I was betrayed and treated him coldly from then on. A month later, 2 of them come in together and I find out that they are twins, and I'd shot down any chance I had with the single one. It sounds a bit like how my mother and dad met. My dad is a twin. Both he and his brother were members of the same fraternity when they were in college. My uncle was the social chair for the fraternity. One day, my dad is going to his car when this girl stops him and chews him out for not providing rides to the social event for the girls in her sorority. My dad patiently waited until she was done and then told her she could tell that to my uncle. The girl was mortified, so much so that my dad decided to make it up to her by taking her out. And that is how my dad met my mom. Story 17. I knew a woman who was going through divorce proceedings with her husband. He was always argumentative and borderline abusive towards her, certainly always shouting and demeaning. Then, just as the divorce was entering its final stages, he very suddenly died. His autopsy showed that he had a massive undiagnosed brain tumor that had been physically altering his personality. His wife felt all kinds of guilt afterward and took it out on everyone she talked to and lost a lot of friends in the process. My wife's uncle is an incredibly nice guy who absolutely adores his wife. We started hearing about marital issues. He was becoming more and more argumentative, and then he hit her. They separated. He harassed her to the point that she got a restraining order. He defied the restraining order and was put in jail. In jail, his issues got him a medical evaluation. Turns out he had a brain tumor. They removed it. He returned to normal and was released from jail. They're back together with him back to his wife adoring self. Story 18. I got laid off from a company I'd worked for over 20 years. I went in for my exit interview, and the HR lady said, "Dwayne, from a site 3 states away, wants to hire you. I said I'm not moving that far. She said you can just work from home. Now, where I was working on a 130-mile round-trip commute, I got laid off and ended up with a commute that was from my bedroom to my den. Kept doing it for over 4 more years. Story 19. My grandfather's funeral. He was always a fairly reserved and distant father as far as I understood. Would fit the stereotype of a northern dock worker who comes home expecting dinner to be on the table and then goes to the pub all evening via the bookies. Anyway, an unsurprising heart attack later, we're all gathered for his funeral. We're a big but close family, so we know everyone, including his friends. However, one guy turns up about the same age as my dad, who nobody knows. Long story short, it turns out it was my grandfather's son, from another family, from another marriage, that went on for as long as his marriage to my grandmother. My grandfather had maintained 2 marriages over 40 years, having 7 children with my grandmother and just 1 with his other woman. They knew about our family and kept away, and apparently my grandmother knew about them but kept quiet. Turns out he wasn't going to the pub every night. Your grandmother knew? That must have been very difficult for her. Story 20. I work at a prison and a lady flew all the way from Nigeria to visit her brother who was supposed to be incarcerated at my unit. She speaks little English, but we tried to explain to her that the inmate was not in the system anymore. He must have been released. We called a supervisor and it turns out he was released over 5 months before. She walks away confused and comes back in with her husband who speaks English much better. We tell him the scenario and he asks, where did he go? He doesn't have any friends or family in the US. We told him we don't know where he went. He was released. He could be anywhere. The guy, obviously confused, says, well, he couldn't have gone anywhere because he doesn't have any legs. So a legless Nigerian ex-felon with no ties is running and scooting around the US and no one knows where he is. Story 21. A few years ago, I got invited to a friend's engagement party. They were throwing a huge bash because they were planning on a very small destination wedding. Later in the evening, my friend's fiancé takes the mic and starts thanking everyone for being there. Sorry, Jen will be out to thank you guys in a minute. She's just having a wardrobe malfunction. He goes on to tell the story about how they met, how they were best friends and decided to get engaged, and finished along the lines of, we wish you could all be there and that we could get married right now. So we're going to. Out walks Jen in her wedding dress.